Hello, everyone. We're just going to give a couple more seconds to let some people join us. Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Navigating the 2024 CDP Reporting Changes. Today we're going to talk about the major changes to CDP and how to prepare. So on behalf of everyone here at SCS Consulting Services, Bonnie and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Megan Maxon, and I am a senior analyst within our consulting group at SCS. My work focuses on supporting companies in all things sustainability, including reporting, greenhouse gas inventories, compliance, and CDP. Today, I am joined by Bonnie Holman, our managing director at SCS Consulting. She brings over a decade of combined experience at SCS, partnering with many companies on their sustainability journey. This includes 2 years at the consulting and 8 years prior at our sister company, SCS Global. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to take a moment to update all of our listeners on our event platform, GoToWebinar, and how to engage with the speakers. To avoid any unnecessary background noises during the presentation, all attendees have been muted, and this will remain a one-way presentation for the duration of the event. If you would like to ask a question, please go to the questions section in the control panel on the upper right-hand side of your webinar console. Once you type your question and hit send, your question will be sent to the panel for review. Depending on the time allotted at the end of this presentation, we will make every effort to answer all questions submitted. Any questions that we are unable to answer will be responded to after the event by a member of the panel. Today's slides, along with a recording of the webinar, will be made available to all registrants and attendees after the conclusion of this webinar. So I'd like to provide a quick overview of SCS and the different services we provide. Our group, SCS Consulting, is the dedicated sustainability advisory business under the SCS brand. Our sister company, SCS Global Services, is celebrating 40 years, in which time it has built its leadership around sustainability standards development, certification, and auditing. Our group, SCS Standards, supports in standard development and standard scheme management, and the Global Heat Reduction Initiative's climate protocol measures all drivers of global warming, enabling business, governments, and investors to meet climate targets while supporting mitigation projects. So just a bit more background on consulting specifically. We were grown out of SCS's collective deep expertise in impact-driven market solutions. Our aim is to serve as a partner throughout a client's sustainability journey, supporting to create and achieve their sustainability goals in a rapidly changing climate and business environment. So this slide provides a summary of our core services in strategy, climate services, reporting, and management systems, a main category of which is climate services, which we will be covering in this webinar. Okay, just a brief overview of our agenda today. We have 5 kind of main topics that we will go into around CDP. So first, we'll go into the CDP background and key changes. Second, new system changes, including timeline and the disclosure portal. Third, the new integrated questionnaire and alignment to reporting frameworks and standards. Fourth, key changes by themes and sectors and the SME questionnaire. And last, recommended preparation steps to help you prepare for your CDP disclosure. Okay, to get started, we are going to see where our audience is at in their CDP journey. So have you previously reported through CDP? We will give about 30 seconds to answer. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, great. So we have pretty big majority yes to the full and minimum, which is awesome, but we also have quite a significant group that has not reported yet. So regardless of your group, it'll be a very informative webinar about CDP. Okay, great. So just some background on CDP. The CDP journey began in 2000, and over the past 20 years, the nonprofit has grown to become the largest global reporting system for environmental impacts. It is used extensively by investors, companies, cities, states, and regions. Over 23,000 companies disclosed in 2023, representing 2/3 of global market capitalization. In 2024, CDP is launching major transitions. What were formerly separate questionnaires for climate, water, and forests are now going to be added into one integrated reporting framework with plastics added on as a new topic. The reporting deadline is additionally extended by 2 months this year to run through September, which gives companies ample time to gather information and report. Okay, great. So why has there been this increased focus on the CDP disclosure? First, there has been widespread utilization of CDP for companies to assess the environmental performance of their supply chains. Disclosures to CDP grew by 24% last year, largely due to supplier requests from larger companies. In addition to the widespread use of CDP data by investors, only in the last year, CDP has grown from being used by 680 institutions to 740. A significant increase that makes sense when what is being disclosed covers $136 trillion in assets. Okay, great. So just a brief overview of the key changes in 2024. One of the biggest changes will be the integrated corporate questionnaire that we've discussed that combines climate change, water, forests, biodiversity, and plastics. We are also seeing increased standard and framework alignment, a dedicated questionnaire for small and medium enterprises, environmental issue-specific modules, and a new disclosure timeline. And we will go into much more detail about all 5 of these topics today. Okay, so just kind of a brief overview and timeline for the key changes to the 2024 disclosure cycle. As you can see, the CDP portal did open yesterday, but the CDP portal was open yesterday, but will not be open for submission until June 4th. CDP will also be releasing scoring methodology and guidance within the week. So companies can currently get in, but they're not able to answer answers. However, you can get started on compiling data and answers for integration before the portal opens on June 4th. I'd also like to point out the submission deadline of September 18th. Okay, great. So just kind of like a brief overview of the new disclosure portal and some of the key new elements for this year. So we have a new navigation system with the redesigned layout and improved functionality, and a simpler view for responses with integration of guidance and scoring. We also have some new key benefits like offline working, improved collaboration tools, and a more detailed submission process to assess and revise errors. While they've made major improvements to the portal, we will have to see how it functions on June 4th. Great, and with that, I will hand it over to Bonnie to go into a bit more detail on how the CDP scoring framework is changing.
Great, thank you so much, Megan. So yeah, since the CDP portal was open to disclosures yesterday, there's been a little bit of time to kind of get in there and see the new functionality. And then when the reporting window opens and questionnaires can be populated for companies on June 4th, we're really looking forward to seeing how that new functionality works in the disclosure process. So lots of changes happening in 2024 with CDP, and I know a lot of companies are really curious to understand exactly how these changes are going to translate to changes potentially to some expectations around CDP scores. So so let's look at, what is changing with CDP scoring and what is staying the same. So in terms of what's staying the same, first of all, we've got our same score levels, A through F. We'll take a closer look at the definitions and what those mean in the next slide. But for those of you that have been disclosing for some time, you'll already be familiar with those levels. The score is still going to be based on your primary sector assignment, and that's something that you'll go through before you launch your questionnaire. So just keep that in mind. CDP will retain separate scores for climate, forest, and water. And as in past years, biodiversity remains unscored, and then the new introduction to plastics this year will also remain unscored. All right, so what is changing? So one of the big, I would say kind of significant kind of overarching changes around the scoring framework this year is essentially the criteria used to score companies is evolving in line with the integrated framework development, which is incorporating new requirements from new and evolving standards. So the IFRS S2 standard is going to be the principal standard that is shifting CDP climate scores from a standards evolution perspective. The TNFD, or Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, is really kind of shifting disclosures, and of course that's going to translate to scoring, and that is touching down more around the questions in water, in forest, and in the other themes. Additionally, there's work underway aligning to other standards, ESRS, that we know will increase in its importance over time, but this year certainly the focus is around IFRS S2 and TNFD a little bit more. CDP has communicated that they are making the scoring system more robust, and that's something that they've kind of hinted at for a few years now. So scoring weighting is shifting towards incentivizing transition plan progress and action over time against targets. In 2024, CDP is introducing an extra layer of essential criteria for climate change, and they're doing this across the scoring levels. So this essential criteria are going to be kind of the core kind of foundational requirements that organizations must meet and must disclose on to be able to progress their score to the next level. It's noted that the use of essential criteria currently has been something well known to companies that are in the leadership or the A level, and it continues to be applied at the A level for forest and water. The big shift here is that it's being expanded in terms of the climate change scoring to encompass additional levels. So if we look here, we've got our 5 kind of scoring levels. So let's go through them just super quickly. So F essentially is non-disclosure. So if you are a company that has been requested to disclose to CDP, and I'm thinking about that 32% of the participants that answered no to the poll, essentially you're not reporting and you're not sure if you will report this year. Well, if you have been requested by one of your customers to disclose and you do not do so, you will receive an F score. The next level is D for disclosure, C for awareness, B for management, and A for leadership. So the introduction of the eligibility criteria is really interesting because it really is intended to provide some clarity for companies to understand exactly what that foundational criteria is that they need to hit in order to progress from D to C to B and upwards to A. The eligibility criteria for the A list level includes a list here that you can look at. Some of it is not necessarily new, but CDP is communicating that the A level criteria will be strengthened. So in that sense, they're looking for really measurable progress on a 1.5C aligned transition plan. As example, there must be a science-based target that is validated, significant policy engagement activities, And A-list or A-level companies will need to demonstrate climate-related monetary incentives for board level members, as an example. The eligibility criteria for levels B and level C are not transparently known because the scoring methodology is not yet released, and we'll look forward to learning that next week when that is released. However, CDP has indicated that there is going to be eligibility criteria introduced to the C level, specifically around governance and around climate management processes. And then those criteria will need to progress upwards in the B level to include the introduction of transition planning and some other items. So here's a look at how the integrated questionnaire is structured. The module titles are not entirely new for seasoned disclosers. However, there are a number of key structural features to understand. So the modules that you see in red are really the integrated modules pulling what were kind of separate disclosure questions across 3 separate questionnaires into one. So these modules that are in red are the ones where you can expect to be answering across the different themes, you know, all in one place. Module 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are the environmental performance modules that contain the specific questions to the theme. So module 7 is the module that will contain specific climate change questions. And this is the module that the majority of the disclosures will be focusing on. So the integration of CDP's corporate questionnaire doesn't mean that all companies will have to answer all the questions on the environmental themes that you see module 7 through module 11. What is significant is that all companies entering the CDP portal will be presented the climate questions, and then companies will opt in as to whether they will be reporting to forest and water. The plastics and biodiversity modules are not scored. However, those modules will be presented to climate change disclosures. So the sector-specific questions are going to be housed in module 12. And then another important change is that there will no longer be a standalone supply chain module, but these supply chain questions are going to be integrated throughout the 12 modules, where companies are really going to be asked to answer certain questions specifically around 4 aspects of the company: products and services, direct operations, supply chain, and investments in R&D. So for example, in module 5, a company will be asked to answer business strategy questions related to all 4 of these areas. Another change, CDP is going to be centralizing the determination for the themes that suppliers to CDP supply chain members will be asked to disclose on. So in the past, supply chain members selected these, and CDP plans to use the activity classification system methodology to assess this. So this is an example of how that integrated questionnaire is going to look at the question level. So this table here really represents bringing what used to be duplicative questions that were asked across individual questionnaires into one place. So it's one question, and companies will be answering to the different themes that they are going to be responding to. So again, if a company is opting out of forest and water security, they would only be answering to climate change, plastics, and biodiversity. By the way, this example is from module 2, and this is a new formulated question. And what's really interesting about this question is that it's really extending the focus from answering around climate risk and opportunities to really answering around the processes related to identifying, assessing, and managing a much more comprehensive set of environmental topics. And included in that is answering to dependencies, to impacts, as well as to risk and opportunities. So one of the big changes this year is really around reporting framework alignment. And kind of as noted earlier, the biggest move this year has been the full alignment to the IFRS S2 standard. And this is, of course, to the climate disclosures. So the IFRS S2 standard, CDP in the past has already been aligned to TCFD, and the IFRS S2 standard encompasses the 11 principles of TCFD and really has transitioned that framework into a global baseline standard. So what's really important about this alignment is that disclosures using CDP climate as a mechanism for public reporting to the IFRS S2 standard can, really lean on the CDP system to support some regulatory compliance requirements that might be new to them or that they may soon be needing to adhere to. So, one example of that is the recent regulation passed late in 2023 in California, requiring companies, both private and public, to begin to report on their climate financial related risks and opportunities in the coming years. The second biggest meaningful alignment that's occurred in 2024 is the integration of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So TNFD was built largely using the same kind of framework, the same kind of core 11 principles that companies may be familiar with from TCFD and also from IFRS S2, but then applying that from climate towards nature-related risks. So TNFD alignment is really impacting the revision and addition of questions for forest and water disclosures. And then we have to mention Europe's new European Sustainability Reporting Standards. CDP is communicating that this is under review. Of course, since there are certain aspects of ESRS that were already aligned to TNFD as well as IFRS and TCFD, there's some sense of alignment there, and it's expected that in coming years there will be further revisions and further alignment. In terms of the new SEC climate disclosure rule, CDP is noting that this is under review. There's clearly distinct requirements in that rule. It should just be said that reporting to CDP is certainly a reporting component that supports and would be connected with a company's reporting under the SEC climate rule. And then, of course, for companies that anticipate that they will fall under the SEC rule in coming years, CDP offers, a great structure and a great mechanism to kind of, grease the wheels and get used to the reporting requirements. So a main objective of designing an integrated questionnaire is to better support organizations to also integrate their environmental management processes and actions. So in Module 2, we see in this module a number of new questions and new concepts. So, as we were talking about the integration of TNFD, we really see the focus on risk and opportunities as shifting to include the identification, the assessment and the management of environmental impacts and dependencies. So what are dependencies? So TNFD defines dependencies as ecosystem services that an organization relies on for their business processes to function. So think about clean and ample water supply, just as a really obvious dependency. With this kind of expansion, there's some key components that climate disclosures will be used to that are now kind of extending and being introduced to management of water, forest, and biodiversity themes. So one of them is time horizons. Companies will need to define short, medium, and long-term time horizons for managing impacts, dependencies, risk, and opportunities. And companies will be asked to detail their assessment process. So where those processes are a little bit different between climate-related aspects and nature-related, these will be reported separately. There's an introduction of just needing to understand priority locations and having kind of data related to these locations. There's increased number of questions that are going to require companies to demonstrate visibility and knowledge of the entities within their value chain. And then scenario analysis, which has been part of the climate questionnaire, is being kind of, the questions around scenario analysis are being revised to be more quantitative and a little bit more comprehensive. And then the questions are also being extended to answering on nature as well as climate. So what that means is companies that are planning to undertake scenario analysis within the next year should really kind of look at these questions and look at their processes and look at what they need to include in their upcoming scenario analysis exercises in order to be able to answer to the questions that are now being asked. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the specific changes around climate change questions. So we're really looking at the alignment with IFRS S2 again as really driving these questions, question changes. The changes that you'll find in the 2024 questionnaire are going to be increased, I would say an increased level of disclosure and detail on the methodologies, the target objective, and the coverage of targets. There's also new questions that are asking about vulnerability to physical and transition environmental risks. And part of this is really asking for quantification of vulnerability of assets and business activities to substantive effects. So in Module 2, companies will disclose what constitutes a substantive effect for them. And this definition will vary, between organizations. So essentially, you'll define substantive in line with corporate level decision making. So for example, the CDP guidance includes that a substantive effect of relatively high magnitude, could occur because of a large climate impact that's related to measured by, we should say, the proportion of business units that would be affected, the size of the effect of those business units, dependency on those business units, and of course, concern or impacts related to shareholders, customers, etc. Companies will also need to detail a little bit more on emissions breakdown for scope 1 and 2. And then there are some revisions that really should support disclosures to align their data disclosed to CDP with their science-based targets. So this is really around reporting on revised or rebaselined targets, and additionally reporting progress towards targets. Included in the revisions related to Science-Based Targets Initiative is the inclusion of the Beyond Value Chain Mitigation project reporting. All right, so let's jump to forests. So one of the biggest changes that we see in forest is that there is just a shift away from the emphasis on kind of commodity data-driven reporting to really reframe the questions towards kind of a land-related lens. So really focusing on land use change. And when we're talking about land use change, we're talking about not only the conversion of forests, but really the conversion of different types of natural ecosystems. So think about riparian areas, native grasslands, and other native habitat. So while it remains titled forest, there really is a larger expansion to land use change. Additionally, there is a focus on deforestation and conversion-free designation of volumes of the commodities that you're sourcing and or producing. So the reporting is shifting to require companies to really disclose on volumes and really disclose on the methods that you put in place as a company to towards achieving deforestation and conversion free, and then communicating the progress towards achieving those targets. So the methods and the progress. And then I know we talked about scores a little bit earlier in the webinar, but we're going to go back to scores and really specifically focus on what this means under forests. So under forest, CDP is introducing a single score, which will replace the individual commodity scores. And this is, in line with that shift away from commodity reporting towards kind of a larger, kind of integrated management view. So the single score marks the most important shift, I think, in terms of CDP scoring this year, because it's a shift to one score. The score is going to be calculated as a combination of the total from the general questions, or essentially the non-commodity specific questions. And then it will also include a combined score that will be derived from the commodity specific questions. So keep in mind that companies are expected to disclose on all the commodities that they source and produce. And the disclosure information is going to include the use of and the dependency on those 4 commodities. So remember that definition of dependency that we talked about a few minutes ago. So essentially, for companies choosing to not disclose on all 4 or any of the 4 of the commodities when relevant, you will essentially, if you do not disclose on it, you will have an impact, on the final score. So CDP has kind of soft pitched, I guess I would say, the use of weighting related to a company's disclosed commodities. But we won't know until next week when the scoring methodology guidance is released exactly what they've landed on there. So that's something to kind of keep your eye on. Also, just to note, we did talk about the essential kind of eligibility criteria, at the different levels that is going to be introduced in climate scoring. In forests, there will not be any additional eligibility criteria below the leadership level or the A level. And of course, that's going to be the same for water as well. And with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Megan to talk to us about some changes to water security.
Awesome, thank you, Bonnie. So in alignment with the forest and climate modules, more information will now be requested on water security. This includes more details at the facility level, and organizations will now be asked to indicate if they have assessed their targets alignment with global environmental treaties, their plans for achieving it, and the actions which contributed the most to achieving or maintaining that target. In addition, CDP has developed the Water Watch tool, which will offer qualitative assessments on water for a wide variety of activities and industries at different stages in the value chain. This is the only analysis of this granularity that exists for assessing the relative impact of different industrial activities from companies, direct operations, supply chain, and product use on the world's water resources. Okay, next slide. Okay, awesome. In addition to these changes on these other environmental topics, there will also be some changes in regards to plastics and biodiversity. This year, many of you will be presented with some basic questions on plastics, while those in high impact sectors for plastics can look forward to an even wider range of questions this year. In regards to biodiversity, all disclosures will now be presented with basic questions. Biodiversity questions will address topics such as biodiversity related commitments and biodiversity indicators. As a reminder, neither plastics nor biodiversity will be scored in 2024. Okay. And then in regards to the financial services sector, we are also seeing some significant changes. There will no longer be a specific forest and water section for financial services companies. In 2024, most questions relating to these companies' portfolio activities will be integrated across climate change, forest, and water. The module continues to focus on questions only relevant to the financial services sector, such as products and services, portfolio values, portfolio emissions, and other environmental impact of portfolios. Organizations will find a new question on financing and insurance aligned with the sustainable finance taxonomy. Environmental impacts of financial services companies come from the activities they finance or insure. Therefore, companies are only requested to report information if they lend to, invest in, or insure sectors of the economy with a critical impact or dependency on nature. For the financial services sector, water content for financing activities will be scored for the first time, but scoring for forest and water financing will remain private in 2024. And then to reach the A-list, financial services companies will be expected to have set a portfolio target. Great, and with that, I will hand it back to Bonnie to discuss small and medium enterprises questionnaire.
Great. So up until this time, we've been talking largely around the full questionnaire. So this year, CDP is changing the minimum questionnaire with now a small and medium enterprise or SME questionnaire. So the SME questionnaire at this point in time does principally focus on climate, and only climate will be scored, although there are a few targeted water and forest questions. As we talked about the full CDP disclosure being fully aligned to IFRS S2, the SME questionnaire is not fully aligned to any of the mandatory reporting standards. The SME questionnaire is open to requesting authorities such as CDP supply chain members, private markets, and banks. So the questionnaire is simplified and shorter. There are no sector-specific questions. There's no biodiversity or plastics module, and the questions that companies will answer around climate are much shorter. However, the supply chain questions are the same across the SME questionnaire and the full questionnaire. So companies that are requesting their suppliers to fill out CDP will receive the same scope of information regardless of the size of their supplier. There's a couple of kind of specific things in the questionnaire that are unique. So the questionnaire does not include a number of the specific questions around climate risk and management. So for example, it asks for disclosure of climate risk and opportunities, but doesn't really get into questions related to scenario analysis, carbon pricing, or really detailed climate risk governance processes like are found in the full disclosure. Likewise, on governance, it does not include detailed questions on board oversight, monetary incentives, etc. And then emissions reporting data does encompass scopes 1, 2, and 3, but is much more streamlined. So what companies are eligible and not eligible to use the SME questionnaire? The majority of mid-sized companies which previously met CDP's minimum version criteria will be eligible to use the SME questionnaire through a transition period as they kind of prepare to report to the full corporate questionnaire. So for small companies, the questionnaire is going to be recommended as they kind of get set up in the portal. And that's going to be for companies that have a headcount under 500 and revenue under 50 million. And then for kind of those medium-sized companies, the full questionnaire will be recommended, but they can opt in to the SME questionnaire. And that's the case for companies with a headcount of less than 500 and revenue between 50 and 250 million. Or if your headcount is between 500 and 1,000 and your revenue is under 250 million. So the full questionnaire is going to be required for all companies without any option to opt into the SME questionnaire if your headcount is above 1,000 or your revenue is above 250 million. And this is simply an illustration so you can see how meaningful of a reduction there is specifically for climate disclosure. So this is just a list of the data and topics that companies will report on under Module 7. And as you can see, the list is just so much shorter for the SME questionnaire. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the changes and the new aspects to CDP disclosure in 2024. Just in terms of how you set up your CDP disclosure, we like to look at it as an annual cycle. And this year is slightly different. There's a lot that's coming at disclosures, but hopefully with some of the integration and streamlined aspects to the reporting system, some of those changes can be balanced with some nice efficiencies. It's okay if you're still kind of at that place of trying to integrate the changes into your plan. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of what that plan looks like for 2024. So this is an example kind of annual roadmap that we've really focused on climate, but you could, think about setting up something similar for water or forest if those are themes that are more important to you. The deadline 5th to mid-September does mean that all the pre-deadline milestone dates have shifted from past years. And, while it seems like there's more time being provided this year, one thing that I want to really flag to those of you listening today is that the time frame between the portal opening and being able to kind of access and generate your questionnaire within the reporting window and the scoring deadline is really not significantly different from past years. So that means in practice that you may find that your processes and your internal work will feel a little crazier just because of all the changes that have gone on. However, the data preparation component can be more easily aligned to companies' annual sustainability reporting cycles, and with that later deadline occurring in September. And it certainly allows more time for companies to really complete their greenhouse gas inventories. It gives more time for companies to carry out the verification processes as well before the deadline. And with that said, you know, it does also give a little bit more time for companies to really understand how the scoring is changing once that is released next week. With the deadline extending into mid-September, it does give less time for companies to really look at their completed disclosure and assess it to the scoring methodology and really analyze the gaps and have enough time to kind of execute on any improvement actions before the end of the calendar year, which is something that we always recommend for our clients, because keep in mind with CDP, even though it's CDP 2024 disclosure, you're really reporting on your 2023 actions and performance data. So with that said, you know, having a really good annual plan and executing on it is important. This year is going to create a number of learnings for companies to integrate into next year's cycle. And so with that, we've set up just some basic kind of preparation steps and categories. Right now, with the scoring methodology being released next week, companies will be able to carry out a gap assessment to understand at the question level the disclosure changes and really understand the scoring implications. So that eligibility criteria that we talked about. Data preparedness, you know, many companies are in this place now. If you were in that 32% answering that you're not sure if you're going to report this year, you still have time for this. So, so it is something we recommend that you get started in May or June at the latest, but there is time. And then in terms of preparedness, review, and disclosure submission, you know, just be ready for some obstacles that the changes of the system, you know, there being a totally new online portal to learn and operate in, and then disclose under, you know, with efficiencies and changes come some obstacles. So we just need to be ready for those. One way to do that is to really like have a firm plan on your internal reviews, getting those review dates set up and identified ahead of time, and then taking some steps before disclosure. So certain disclosures, certain companies will be able to keep data private. So understanding that up front, and particularly with regard to your review process, I think is quite important, so that your leaders understand the implications if the data is public and also are able to really review and analyze the disclosures with regard to data that is preferred to be private versus public. So all in all, there's a lot that is new to CDP this year. Even seasoned companies are finding that extra support this year will be needed and at least helpful. SCS supports efforts to improve and to disclose, while our sister company, SCS Global Services, supports verification for both GHG and water inventories. So this slide just lists a couple of the areas that we support companies. Even just getting started on that gap assessment is something that we support with, but certainly, you know, either leading the disclosure process or supporting it for companies. And we have a few minutes left, so I will go ahead and wrap it up here, and we'll kind of transition over to some questions with the remaining time that we've got. So just give me a second just to look at some of the questions here and see what we can get answered. Okay, this is a really good one because I don't know the answer to it, but I'm going to be very transparent. Will our past responses be copied over to the new questionnaire? So it's not just a new questionnaire, it's a totally new online system. And it used to be called the ORS. CDP is now calling it the CDP portal. And And because the questionnaire is an integrated questionnaire, and because it's a new portal, we're not sure about that. It's a really great question. I think once June 4th comes around and you're able to access your questionnaire, we'll all know the answer to that. But yeah, to be honest with you, I do not know. The one thing I will say about it is, even if you did kind of download your disclosure from last year, there is a really nice kind of upload functionality. And then of course, if you are working with a provider, they'll help you to really kind of integrate any of your past answers and know which questions those will flow into. And so, yeah, so there will be some ways to kind of get around that, even if it doesn't copy over, which would be hard to know that it would. Okay, let's see, somebody has asked here around let me answer a quick one. Will the slides be shared? We do anticipate that we'll be sharing the slides as well as the recording to the webinar. Somebody has asked about reporting and keeping the information public versus private. So that'll be something that you will look at as you're setting up your questionnaire, and will be an option. Typically, it's always something that you're validating as well prior to your submission. Let's see. How may I secure your support? I love that question. Let me click to the next slide. So you can contact Megan or myself. And additionally, we will be sending out the recording in a webinar, and there will be an opportunity to connect with us with that email. That will be sent out within the next 24 hours. There is another question here around impacts. A lot of focus on the impacts and dependencies is to align better with CSRD. So this question is asking, for companies who have not carried out any double materiality assessments, which is a requirement under Europe CSRD, how does that really align when answering the questions? And I'm taking it to mean that those questions are around impacts and dependencies that are nature related. It's a really good question. The CDP has all the questions set up in the questionnaire, and it's up to every disclosing company to elect which ones they are answering to and to what level of detail. And so with CDP, particularly around water and forests, this focus is really around your impacts, on water resources, on land resources, and dependencies as well. So yes, there is that connection with CSRD in terms of kind of responding to the CDP questions. Some companies might elect to go into greater detail in their responses, just because it does have scoring implications. And so, seeking to try and get the best possible score that they can. So yeah, there is that interplay, but in terms of the decision to answer the questions in CDP or to not, just know that the more information and the more disclosures you provide, the positive impact that it has, on your CDP score. In a lot of ways, the CDP questionnaire, around these questions provides kind of a practice environment for preparing for CSRD reporting. Let's see, I think we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Okay, what is the transition period between the SME questionnaire? So for the individual asking about transitioning, so if you piloted the SME questionnaire last year, then I would say you are going to meet the eligibility criteria for the SME questionnaire this year. And so I think in terms of which questionnaire you are going to be reporting to, maybe just going back to that eligibility criteria that we talked about. If you have any questions on what that eligibility criteria is, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you and help you kind of figure that out. There's another respondent that said that they asked CDP whether the responses from previous years would be copied over, and it sounds like the answer from CDP was that yes, it would be, but it would not be as complete as previous years. So it's an interesting answer. My gut reaction to that is that, when you are completing your disclosure, you need to make sure that it is detailed and complete. And so if you're getting copied over incomplete data, that's not as helpful as you think it might be. Let's see, I think here's a great question. This is the one I was trying to get to earlier. Has the verification criteria for achieving level A changed? Really looking forward to seeing the detailed scoring methodology around this. But what CDP has communicated to date is that in order to meet level A or leadership level, a company must have 100% of their scope 1 and 2 inventory verified and 70% of their scope 3 verified. As you know, for the person asking this question, the scoring has many tiers, and some of those tiers include verification in progress and verification completed. And so there's a lot of nuance around the verification score and the points associated to it, but keep in mind those percentages that we just mentioned, because that's going to be key for companies that are really looking at that leadership level. Great, and I think that we've gone through all of the slides. And so, yeah, I want to thank everybody for staying on through the question and answer period. And as we mentioned before, we're here to help support, and we will be sending out the recording and the webinar. And we wish all of you a smooth and a wonderful CDP season the next coming months. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.